Good morning again. Are we still? I was thinking of how I wanted to start, and I was going to start by apologizing for being late today, and then I said, all I've done for the last 3 weeks is apologize, so I'm not. I'm going to say thank you for knowing that I was on my way, or that I would tell someone that I wasn't, and getting the party started without me so I could walk into the festivities. This morning, and then I thought about this here. I was going to share my morning because I think there's something important about modeling and showing what chronic illness really looks like, because I know I'm not the only one. And I know that some of you, tomorrow morning on your way to work, it might flare up and how you need to handle it. And I'm just a really transparent person, right? Like I tell the truth and the challenges and the struggles. So this morning I woke up and I thought, my wife probably thinks I'm crazy, bless her heart. I thought I wasn't breathing, but I mean, I was talking, so I had to be breathing, but I couldn't get a full breath, and I still can't. And I keep yawning, but it's not the full one, so it keeps happening. So if I yawn today during the service, it's not boring to me, it's good. It's just I can't help it, and because I can't get that full breath, it keeps rolling over and over again. And the IBS part of my fibromyalgia was acting up this morning too. So every time I went to start the day, I had to pause the day. And so it's a strange new world for me in the midst of this. And it's funny because I have a friend who has navigated fibro for about 10 years. And I messaged her, and my text always says, "Hello, I'm calling the fibro hotline. Here is my latest symptom." And she just cracks up. And if I don't ask her anything, she was like, "Why, is everything okay? What's wrong? Why aren't you asking me if this happens to me too?" And so now when I feel something, or when I feel a flare, when something lasts more than a day, my Google knows to finish the sentence, "Is this fibro?" And so it has gotten very generative in making sure I understand what the symptoms are. And then I wondered if I'm just such an overachiever that now that the illness has been named, if my body just wants to show up and get an A in every category. Because every available symptom that there is, it's like, okay, well, 60% of people with fibro have migraines. Okay, check. 70% have IBS. Okay, check. 40% experience that. I'm like, okay, I do like to excel, but I was not here for the illness Olympics. I will take a silver in that. I don't have to place at all. However, I just keep checking those boxes. So I am very thankful for you all's grace and patience with me. It has been interesting, to say the least. It has called for a lot of adjustments while relearning my capacity and what my body cannot do versus what it has always done. I can say for the first couple days, I did what I always do, which does not work, by the way. There is what's the word for it? I think it's called an aphorism, when a popular term has been, you don't necessarily know who said it, but it's become popular, that insanity is doing the same thing the same way, expecting different results. And that is my favorite spot to live in, because I just continue to power through. I try to show up in all the same ways. I offer thousands of apologies for repeatedly needing more time, or not being able to make a meeting, or having to reschedule something. And at the end of every single day, I was in a puddle of tears because I felt like a disappointment, or I felt like a failure. And I didn't recognize this new way of being in this body that I'm living in right now. So when it came time to pick the text for this week, I returned back to Acts 2, where we had been for the Pentecost and Sunday after Pentecost series. Something felt unfinished, and I'm glad I went back. There was a word in there for me and my tenderness that I'm now, today, going to offer to you. For some of you, what we'll talk about today is basic. You'll say, "Pastor Shana, this is Bible 101, and I am a graduate Bible student. I need graduate level sermons." And to that I say, amen, I understand, maybe next week. But what I have found is when there's a problem too big to solve or something going on, a mindset shift or what have you, the thing that needs tweaking is the fundamentals. It's the basics. It's not always this big abstract thing. I don't need to know if you are a Barthian Christian or all of these other things that you learn about. Sometimes it's love, it's faith, it's hope. It is those basic fundamental things. So if this feels elementary and you're sick of it, I understand. But I ask you that today you continue to offer grace and say, well, this is the word that Pastor Shana needed. And so I'll just sit here and listen, and maybe I'll find something for myself too. The text today came from Acts 2, 42 through 47. It's a passage that many of us know well. It's a text that appears frequently in conversations about the early church. We hear about the apostles' teaching, the fellowship, the breaking of bread, and the prayer. We hear about the signs and wonders and people sharing what they have so that no one among them is left in need. It's familiar enough that we can almost hear it without actually reading or listening to it. We know how the story goes, and because of that, sometimes we'll miss what Luke is trying to say. This week in this text, what caught my attention was not the usual, because generally pastors preach this on Giving Sundays and to talk about the tithe and the offering. I'm not. It wasn't the sharing of possessions or the wealth redistribution or even the miraculous things happening, even though those are important. What stood out to me was that the simple reality that these people had become deeply connected to one another. Their lives had become intertwined. They worshiped together. They ate together. They hung out at each other's houses. They paid attention to each other's needs. They celebrated together, and they carried burdens and pain together. The Spirit didn't simply create and curate and gather a collection of believers. The Spirit formed a community. That word community often gets sent out and has to do some really heavy lifting. Sometimes it's used as a measure of what we as a people do. We point to volunteer hours, service hours, projects, committees. Those things are important for sure, yet community is simply not the sum of our activities. Community is the summation of who we are together and how we belong. That's what's happening in Acts. The believers are not following a 52 or 12-point program. They are not simply checking boxes. They're living as people whose lives became connected by the work of the Holy Spirit. Their willingness to share is not out of requirement. It is what has grown out of a recognition that I belong to you and you belong to me. It's a generosity that goes beyond advocacy or mutual aid. It's a response to right relationships. In his commentary of Acts, Willie Jennings writes and captures that Luke gives us sight of a holy wind blowing through structured and settled ways of living and possessing and pulling things apart. He describes people who have become so caught up in the love of God that they begin to view everything and everyone differently. Their resources, their stuff, their daily bread, and even their sense of ownership are reshaped by love. Jennings goes on to suggest that what is truly dangerous is not a plan for sharing wealth, but a God who dares to impose divine love upon us. I have thought about that phrase all week. A God who imposes divine love. Because divine love keeps drawing. It draws the circle wide, and it draws us together towards one another. It keeps reminding us that our lives are connected atomically and molecularly in ways we often forget. As I read those words, I found myself thinking about the history of this congregation. Long before many of us arrived, me included, the people who helped create what we now know as New Creation were asking these same questions about what it means to live faithfully in community. There was intentional community and shared resources. There was common purses. There was a belief that faith was not simply something practiced by individuals who happened to gather in a building once or twice a week. Faith was something to be lived together. While the form has changed over the years, that impulse, that part of our DNA remains. I see it in the sharing funds. I see it in the sharing box outside. I see it in the meal trains that appear when someone is struggling, in the rides to church, in the cards, in the phone calls, in the flowers that get sent, and in the countless acts of care that I don't know about that happen quietly without recognition. Most of the stories of how we community never become public. They simply become part of the fabric of this sacred tapestry. Perhaps that's why this text felt so important to me this week. I have spent much of my life being the person that helps. I am far more comfortable offering assistance than giving it. You ask me how I am, and I might say, oh, good, how are you? What's going on with the babies? How's the cat? What happened last week? I deflect well. It's a gift. Yet this season is requiring something different of me. It's requiring me to receive care from others, and when the room can't be read, asking for it and almost demanding it myself. And for those not familiar with when the room can't be read, it means I can't assume that people will just know by looking at me that I can't go, or that I can't do it, or that I'm not available. I've had to verbalize things that feel much more comfortable kept inside. Last week, I needed help getting groceries. Friends came over to assemble a file cabinet because my arms were too weak to put it together myself. Sometimes the fork is too heavy to even eat dinner. At work, people have stepped in to take calls and lighten my workload when I did not have the energy. My COO and my vice president supervisors are my new mothers. They track my little green dot on Teams, and at 12 o'clock, I start getting absurd messages about how I need to log off. Here at church, members of the LCRT team have thought through contingency plans and backup options in case there comes a Sunday when I need a different plan. No single person has carried all of it. Different people have stepped in at different times, each one bringing what they could. And all of that, the biggest thing I've had to process is that accepting help is not a failure. It is one of the ways that community works. None of us can be everything for everybody. We can't expect anyone to be everything for everybody. None of us can carry every burden alone. There are seasons when we're able to give and seasons where we must receive. The gift of community is that we don't have to navigate either side of those seasons by ourselves. It is that process of discovery that I've been on that led to the title today, The Case for Community. It's an homage to a book called The Case for Christ by journalist Lee Strobel. He was an atheist who set out to investigate these claims of Christianity after his wife converted. His goal was not to strengthen faith, but to challenge it. He interviewed scholars, he examined evidence, he explored all of these historical accounts, and in the process found his own self convinced and converted by what he discovered. I am not here to recommend this book. Pick it up or don't. I have my own feelings about it, but whatever, it's some good, some bad, And in no way am I here to become an apologist. That is not my vein of Christianity either, but I do understand his premise. I understand the idea of examining something or needing to examine something so closely and wondering if it will hold up to the weight of your questions. You could say over the last month, like Strobel, I have conducted my own investigation. Each time I've had to dig deep and find the courage and strength and humility to ask for help, has been a piece of evidence or a part of a new pattern. Not evidence about the existence of God or the power of the Spirit. I'm sold out for that. I'm clear about that. But evidence about how I can hold the sacredness of community. Every time a friend checked in, every time someone showed up, I was able to clock another piece of evidence in the file. And the outcome I've come to is the realization that community is not just some nice thing, it is a necessary thing. And my own old patterns, my own martyrdom and self-sacrifice, I must continue to remind myself there is no extra crown for deprioritizing myself in heaven. Me choosing to do it all was not community. I had to let go of the belief that my needs were a burden to other people. And I had to admit that the patterns I created for myself or that past people created for me were wrong. The truth is, my body has changed, and maybe some of yours have too. My capacity has changed, and maybe some of yours has too. And maybe it needs to, and you just have not made sense of that. Some things for me are harder than they used to be. But needing other people does not make me a disappointment, and it does not make me a failure. It makes me human. It makes me part of this metaphysical dust. I suspect I'm not the only one who needs that reminder that we are human. Our text today offers us an additional reminder of that. A vision of people whose lives are woven together by the Spirit. What I offer us today is to remember that this is not simply some ancient story back in the ancient church that existed many, many, many years ago. This is how God still cares for us through people and practical, ordinary expressions of help. Perhaps that is my case for community this morning. Not that community solves every problem or that it's always easy. Anyone who's been part of any church knows that is just not true. But some of us need to hear that it is okay to not only need help, but to ask for it. Some of us need to hear that accepting care is not a weakness. Some of us need permission to stop apologizing for being human. Somewhere along the way on this journey of life, many of us learn to feel guilty when we have needs, ashamed when we cannot do everything ourselves, and embarrassed when we have to rely on others. Yet nothing here in Acts suggests that dependence on one another is something to be overcome. In fact, Luke seems to suggest the opposite. Dependence and interdependence on one another is a sign that the Spirit is present among us. So here is my case for today. Release the guilt. Release the shame. Release this idea that your worth is measured by how little you need from others, meaning you are more worthy the less you need. God has always done her best work through communities of imperfect people. Sometimes you're the one who will do the carrying. Sometimes you're the one who needs to be carried. But both times are within the life of our faith. The believers in Acts understood something. They understood that needing one another was not a flaw in the matrix. It was the design. The Spirit did not create isolated disciples to survive on their own. The Spirit created a people who would share life together, who would make room for one another's needs, and who would discover that belonging is one of God's greatest gifts. My prayer is that we know that. And my prayer today is that when the time comes for us to give, we do so freely. And when the time comes for us to receive, we do that with that same measure of grace. May it be so unto us.